The story begins with the fact that a new ghost was discovered in one of the areas of the city. He could be seen from 12 to 3 at night. He throws a basketball from side to side, dancing. According to the research, the ghost's abilities are mainly related to the sound of his basketball shot. So far, 13 people have been killed, and authorities have dubbed the ghost the basketball phantom. Meanwhile, schools warned students to be extremely careful at night. However, not all the children listened to the teacher attentively enough, so she broke off a piece of chalk and threw it directly at the student who had fallen asleep on the desk. The chalk hit the white-haired guy, Ethan, right in the forehead, and he screamed in unexpected pain. The teacher once again asked him a question that he slept through the first time. What would he do if he suddenly met a ghost at night? But the guy didn't understand anything. He had just been lying in his bed and watching horror films. Had he really been reborn? However, the teacher hurried him with an answer, and the guy replied that the night ghosts themselves are not capable of causing harm to others. They mainly influence the human psyche with the help of words, because of which the person falls into delirium and goes into the deep forest to be eaten by others' ghosts, so you just need to pass by the night ghosts. Then the teacher stopped him and said that a student in the next class was killed by a night ghost some time ago, so all students should be careful. At that moment, Ethan felt the original owner's memories of this world flood into his brain, and he realized that he was in a parallel world. The only difference from his previous life was that this world is full of spirits, demons, and monsters are rampant, and everyone here is capable of awakening their own spiritual weapon, becoming a spirit lord, facing ghosts, and even killing them. At that moment, the bell rang and someone grabbed Ethan by the shoulder, saying that an instructor would soon arrive from the palace to personally test their spirit weapon. It was Liam, a chubby guy with dark hair. He kept talking about how he was going to become a high-ranking spirit lord, but Ethan doubted that he would succeed. Meanwhile, a gray-haired man in a black coat was approaching the office, and everyone on his way bowed respectfully to him. It was Albert, a third-level spirit lord from Tenchi Palace, and he was in charge of testing spiritual weapons. Ethan was surprised at how strong the man's aura was. Ethan said that people are born with a spiritual weapon. It can be controlled by spiritual power. And then he showed a small, shiny ball, a spiritual stone obtained from a ghost. It contains a lot of energy and can help stimulate the spiritual weapon. The students were called in one by one so that they could try the effect of the stone on themselves. The fair-haired guy squeezed the stone in his hand, and a bright blue aura swirled around him. Everyone was surprised. Something round and flattened flew out of his chest. But after a moment, everyone realized that it was an ordinary roadside stone, and the whole class burst into laughter. However, Albert rebuffed them, saying that the boy's weapon was of a high level, and it even had 7 skill holes. He extended his hand, and a bright aura shone between his fingers. And then the man added that the type of spiritual weapon is not that important, and it is the holes on the weapon that are the most important factor. Everything is like in the game League of Gods and Ghosts. A character with 7 skills has an absolute advantage over a character with 3 skills, because the more holes a spiritual weapon has, the more soul pearls it can absorb. The man demonstrated different types of weapons, and Ethan, meanwhile, openly fell asleep. And then Oliver was called next, the guy who had become a real thorn in Ethan's side ever since he stopped him from harassing his classmate, and now he had awakened a good spiritual weapon, which was undoubtedly bad for Ethan himself. Oliver went to the board, showing off his weapon to everyone with undisguised pride. However, Liam was unhappy with this. He believed that it was absolutely unfair, but Ethan was confident that he could easily deal with his weapon. And as if by fate, Ethan was called to a duel with Oliver. The guy was sure that even with 3 skill holes, he would trample this upstart into the mud. He picked up the spiritual stone, expecting a weapon that would be reflected in his soul, in the soul of the reincarnated. Soon a blade burst out of his chest. It had perfect proportions, sharp blades. However, it was an ordinary weapon with 3 holes, and the entire class burst into laughter because it was the worst weapon among all the students here. Oliver was the most happy, because he had a great opportunity to bring this arrogant boy down to earth. Amid the laughter of his classmates, Ethan sat down at his desk, and then he saw that some incomprehensible aura was oozing from his weapon in black drops. She began to scatter throughout the class, but the others did not seem to notice. and then a message appeared in front of Ethan, asking him to lower his head and look at his shadow. Looking down, the guy saw that his shadow seemed to have turned into black slurry, which was spreading across the floor. And then he realized that his shadow was controlled by something. A message appeared in front of Ethan again. It said that his shadow could devour ghosts and acquire their powers. The creature seemed to read Ethan's thoughts. It knew that he doubted the reality of what was happening and would definitely want to find evidence later. The guy was shocked. Could his shadow really be capable of this? After all, if this is so, then any ghost's ability could become his, and the number of skill holes would no longer limit him. He will be able to hunt strong ghosts, recover quickly, and then he will become the Lord of Spirits. Meanwhile, a meeting of third-group students was taking place on the sports ground. Albert stood on stage. He congratulated the guys on the awakening of their spiritual weapons, and then asked them a question. What exactly do people rely on in the fight against ghosts? Oliver immediately shouted out the answer, a spiritual weapon, and the rest of the students supported him. However, the answer was wrong. Albert meant courage, and Oliver was quite annoyed at being corrected in front of such a large crowd. Albert continued. He said that the power of ghosts is that they are dead, and people have long been afraid of everything otherworldly. He added that he had seen many talented spirit masters with 10 or more skills, but when they faced the spirit for real, they were scared to death and couldn't even pick up a weapon. However, one of the students standing in front of Ethan was not embarrassed by this. She whispered that she would still become a high-ranking spirit lord. The man said that the test that the young masters have to go through includes not only the awakening of weapons, but also a practical part. After all, if they really want to become a spirit lord, they must have the courage to face the spirit in person, even though it is dangerous, and some of the students may get hurt. The guys panicked. They did not expect that the test would be so dangerous, but Ethan did not give up. He believed that the most that the spirits would do was scare them a little, especially since they would be under the supervision of the palace master Tenshi. In addition, the young man understood that if he could not pass even this test, then he would definitely not be able to become a powerful lord of spirits. Albert said that those who wanted to leave could do so now, and many of the students immediately walked towards the exit, muttering to themselves that they did not want to deal with the spirits. But Ethan remained standing in place, which surprised many of his classmates. Liam and Oliver also remained on the field with him. Albert chuckled contentedly, because out of 300 people only 100 remained, and the boy didn't even raise an eyebrow. After that, the man turned around and said that the remaining guys could go to the school gates. Oliver walked up to Ethan imposingly, not believing that he really stayed. But the blue-haired young man answered him that Oliver would definitely be able to pass the test, because he was so ugly that the ghosts themselves would run away from him in horror. Ethan and his friend then headed towards the school gates, leaving their angry classmate behind. Meanwhile, 100 of the most outcast spirit lords had already gathered at the gate. They had to go to a place where only wandering ghosts lived, and Albert assured them that they could come out of there safe and sound even without spiritual weapons. They just had to keep determination in their hearts. He also said that there are 3 levels of danger: white, green, and red, and night ghosts are at best a white level of danger, while strong red-level ghosts can run rampant inside cities. Some high-ranking ghosts can even cover the sky and destroy the city. According to the rules of the challenge, whoever kills the most ghosts will receive the green ghost pearl. The students immediately cheered up because this pearl was worth a lot of money, and now it was so close to them. However, one of the students, Vivian, a dark-haired girl in a pink sundress, was determined to win. She was sure that the green-level soul pearl would be hers because she had already awakened an artifact with 9 skill holes. But Ethan was also not going to give up just like that. He had the same goal, to get the pearl. After a while, the students arrived in the northern outskirts of the city, where the test awaited them. Meanwhile, Oliver and several other guys decided to team up with Vivian, and she didn't mind, as long as they didn't interfere with her. Liam was scared. He wanted to work together with Ethan, but he decided that it would be better for them to work alone. Ethan knew that it was better for him not to tell anyone about the existence of the shadow. Meanwhile, Albert gave each student a jade bottle into which the ghost's pearl should be poured after he was defeated, and based on how full the bottle was, The winner would be chosen. With these words, the man announced the start of the test. And since Ethan decided to act alone without delay, he went deep into the forest first. Albert looked after him, thinking that the boy had a brave heart and could be very useful, but his qualifications left much to be desired. Following Ethan, Vivian's team, led by the girl herself, advanced. The guy himself was already wandering through the trees. Wandering ghosts flew past him every now and then. Everything was quite calm. But then one of the ghosts from behind the trees seemed to call him by name. Ethan immediately turned around, grabbing his dagger. Had he really stumbled upon a ghost so quickly? However, the ghost was faster than the boy, and in an instant found himself behind him. It was a gray-haired dead man in torn robes. He looked at Ethan with empty eye sockets. The creature put a bony long hand on the guy's shoulder and he froze with horror. Turning around, Ethan saw the terrifying face of the spirit. Only in one of his sockets was an eyeball. He looked at the guy. An ominous aura swirled around him. However, Ethan cut the spirit's body with one movement of his blade, and it evaporated screaming. All that was left of the terrible creature was a bright blue orb, a ghostly aura still swirling around it. It was a pearl. It flew into Ethan's bottle, and the guy meanwhile noted that his dagger was very convenient. It's a pity that it had so few holes for skills. When the young man turned around, a ghostly aura swirled around him again. Soon the spirits crawled out of her, muttering something about their own, gradually surrounding Ethan. A black aura flowed from the eyes and mouths of the spirits. Like tentacles, it began to spread across the field and soon reached the young man's feet. A moment later, his limbs were already captured in black vines. They wrapped around him more and more tightly. However, with one deft movement of his dagger, he cut the threads of the black aura, freeing himself from it. After another moment, he rushed towards the spirits, slashing at them with his weapon, cutting them in half and cutting off their heads. Soon it was all over, and the out-of-breath Ethan sat down to rest near a tree, looking with relief at his jade bottle. It was almost a third full. But he understood that he could not relax, because he was alone, and Vivienne was working with a team, and if they concentrated all their resources on themselves, then Ethan would definitely not be able to catch up with them. As soon as he thought about what to do next, his shadow began to move again, turning into a viscous liquid rising upward. Then the message appeared in front of him again. It said that destroying the wandering ghosts would not be enough, and that Ethan should go deeper into the forest, destroy the white ghosts, as well as the misty ghost hiding in the cemetery. Ethan was taken aback, because he had no intention of going into such depths. He could not understand whether the shadow had a mind of its own, because it seemed to him that it was simply leading him by the nose. The guy decided that he should go back. Since white-level ghosts can seriously harm a person, only first-level spirit lords should deal with them, and he didn't want to die just yet. He wandered back to the buses when the shadow again created a message for him, saying that he knew about his suspicions and mistrust, but if he turned around now, then he would never get the green-level soul pearl. Resigned to the fact that the shadow would not leave him alone, Ethan asked how he should defeat the white mist ghost. The creature replied that this time he would need the help of the shadow that was under him. At that moment, the aura swirled and began to form into something. It was a person. The creature smiled ominously and said that Ethan needed to go north, where he would find a white misty ghost in the cemetery. At this point, the shadow disappeared. Was that really his whole clue? Ethan knew that when the test was over, he had to find out what kind of creature it was, but now he needed to focus on getting the pearl. Soon the guy came to the cemetery, and he immediately realized that there was some kind of strange aura reigning everywhere here. The surroundings became increasingly foggy, and then Ethan remembered that a large concentration of wandering ghosts with strong feelings of resentment and hatred, often living in cemeteries, have the ability to summon large numbers of spirits and hide their true bodies in a white fog that impairs visibility and kills people. Apparently, this was the Misty Ghosts method. Meanwhile, the test for Vivian's team was in full swing. She easily cut demons in half with her spiritual weapon. All that remained for the girls' partners was to collect pearls after destroying the ghosts. Vivian guessed that wandering ghosts were also divided into weak and strong, and she had to spend too much spiritual energy. The guys admired their classmates' fighting skills because she had just defeated a white-level wandering ghost. But Vivian herself was already very tired. She needed to regain her strength, so she sat down near the nearest tree, intending to rest a little. And even though her team wanted to continue filling the jade bottle without rest, the girl was adamant. She intends to regain her strength and then beat everyone with a huge advantage, because only in this way will the Tenshi Palace be able to recognize her talent. Meanwhile, Oliver's team was trapped and surrounded by thorny vines. The guys realized that this was the very lair of wandering ghosts, and they urgently needed to leave here. After some time, when the team ran a sufficient distance from the forest, the guys decided to rest. Suddenly there was a sound behind Oliver, someone rustling in the bushes. It turned out that it was Liam. Apparently he got lost. He wasn't on Ethan's team and was just wandering around the forest alone until he came across Oliver's team, but the guys didn't want to deal with him because he was an inferior person to them. The guys turned around and left, saying that if Liam got into trouble, he should blame his friend for leaving him. The young man was depressed because the forest was infested with wandering ghosts, and he had no one to rely on because his friend was unknown where. And Ethan, meanwhile, fought with a foggy ghost, which turned out to be much stronger than the creatures that the guy had encountered before. The spirit grabbed Ethan by the neck and held him aloft, making hissing sounds. A thick fog came out of his mouth and penetrated straight inside the boy. The creature injected yin energy into Ethan's body, sucking out his vitality, but the guy understood that he did not want to die here at all. Suddenly, Ethan's shadow began to move again. It formed into a hand. Many shadow tentacles appeared around it, and they reached towards the ghost. They began to entangle the creature from all sides, not allowing it to even understand what was happening. A shadow hand grabbed the ghost's face directly, and tentacles wrapped around his body and arms, forcing him to loosen his grip and release the boy. Ethan was free, but he understood that the shadow had overcome the ghost, and now he would turn into white fog and run away, and he could not allow this. Just as the ghost was about to turn into a misty aura, Ethan jumped up, piercing it with his dagger. When he landed, he was in shock. He didn't know the shadow was capable of this, and yet it saved his life. And just as the guy wanted to take the pearl into his bottle, he realized that his shadow had again become ordinary, lifeless. The creature had left, leaving him without the long-awaited trophy. However, suddenly the shadow under his feet began to form the word right. The guy examined his right hand and froze. It looked like it was burnt, covered in scars. But suddenly, she seemed to begin to produce an aura. It was the same fog as the ghost they had just defeated with the shadow. The guy passed his hand, and the fog swirled in a whirlwind. And then he realized that not only was he not harmed from meeting such a strong spirit, but now he could control the fog. He had gained the power of a white, foggy ghost. The spirit lords could only use the abilities of the ghosts with the help of the soul pearls embedded in the spirit weapons, but Ethan could use them directly, without a weapon or a pearl. The guy was sure that it was all thanks to the shadow. His right arm could be returned to its original form when the skill disappeared, but the changes were still a little scary, so he should have worn long sleeves just in case. Now Ethan could hide his presence and use the unpredictability factor, and this was simply the perfect skill for his spiritual weapon. He realized that now it was his turn to hunt. An hour later, Ethan's bottle was almost full. The white, misty ghost's ability really increased the efficiency of killings, and he wondered what other skill the green soul pearl could give. After all, Ethan was looking forward to becoming stronger. Meanwhile, dawn came, and the guys began to slowly gather in the clearing where the test began, and Liam was glad more than anyone that it was over. Soon, Oliver and his company appeared in the clearing. He was clearly glad that Ethan was still not here. The guy approached Albert and gave him his bottle. It was 80% full, which turned out to be a very good result. Following Oliver, Vivian entered the clearing along with her team. She walked very confidently, as befits the daughter of the guardians of the spirits. She also gave Albert her bottle, and he was amazed because it was one of the best results of the day. Vivian decided that victory was already in her pocket and asked to give her the green pearl of the soul. But at that moment, Ethan appeared in the clearing. He imposingly moved towards the rest of the students, saying that it would be unfair to announce the winner without waiting for his return. Vivian was sure that this was a waste of time, because no one could surpass her, but Ethan still went up to Albert and gave him his bottle. The man himself did not expect anything special from the boy, but when he opened his bottle, he became numb. It was simply overflowing with pearls. All the students were shocked. How is it possible that a guy with only 3 skill holes could achieve this? Albert had no choice but to rightly recognize Ethan as the winner. He kept his promise and gave him the reward, the green pearl of the soul. Vivienne was extremely unhappy with this development of events because she was sure that she would get the pearl, and now Ethan had become her main rival. Albert pondered how a guy with such qualifications could win, but nevertheless told him that there was also a master in the Tenshu Palace with only 3 spirit weapon holes, and yet he was very strong. But before Ethan could ask him more about this man, the man declared the test over and sent all the students home, looking after them and thinking to himself that Ethan's case was 1 in a million, still not believing that this could happen a second time. After a while, Ethan had already returned to the city. It was already late evening, but this place in the city had always been very crowded, but now there was not a soul here. Suddenly, someone appeared behind the guy and asked him something, which made Ethan jump in fear. It was an elderly man. He asked if Ethan knew where the furniture house was. His son works there as a manager, but he did not return home today and did not answer the phone. But the guy understood that this furniture house had been closed for a long time, so he invited the old man to return home and wait for news from his son for some more time. And at that moment he noticed that the elderly man was not casting a shadow. It was a ghost. Ethan immediately turned around, saying that he would bring his son here, and he ran away, not wanting to be in the company of a ghost anymore. Finally, the young man ran to the house and immediately slammed the door, because he knew that that furniture house had caught fire and the entire staff had burned alive, and since then no one had worked there, and that old man, apparently, was a night ghost. He had difficulty distinguishing the night ghosts from the people inside the city, and he knew that he needed to train more. Ethan walked inside the house, and a dark-haired girl appeared in front of him, dressed only in a long white shirt. This was the daughter of the adoptive parents of the previous owner of the body, Gwen. She didn't understand why her brother looked so surprised. Maybe it was all about that instructor from Tenshi's palace? But Ethan said that it wasn't about him because he, like Gwen, had awakened his spiritual weapon, and then the girl asked how many skill holes he had received. Having learned that her brother's spiritual weapon only had 3 holes, Gwen was very surprised and advised him to do something else, deciding that working with spirits was not his thing. The girl's own weapon had 12 skill holes, so many that she could share them with Ethan. The guy couldn't believe whether she was really so gifted, but with these words, Gwen went to her room, saying that she was going to bed and that Ethan should also go to bed early. The guy went to his room and began to think that even though he had the pearl, using it was a real headache. However, he needs to absorb her first to see what skills she can give him. Suddenly, the shadow wrote a message for Ethan again, saying that he now wants to let the shadow consume this pearl. But this time, Ethan was not going to give up all the shadows. Instead, he wanted to insert the pearl into his spirit weapon, which he did. As soon as the pearl entered the hole, the young man's dagger and himself seemed to be pierced by lightning. In a moment, it was as if he was in space. He was floating above the planet alone with his weapon. The dagger glowed with turquoise flames. He received a green-level soul pearl skill, a flash of green light. Ethan knew that this skill was quite powerful, capable of causing serious damage to white-tier ghosts. Suddenly, the pearl seemed to release waves of its energy in 3 more directions. The guy was shocked. Had an expanded branch of the soul pearl really appeared in his spiritual weapon? The green pearl formed 3 more. The bronze, black, and white mist ghost pearl. The bronze gave strength and range. The black allowed you to silence the enemy for 3 seconds, and the white halved the buffer time and spiritual power required for this ability, and also doubled the speed their release. Ethan understood that each of the abilities were very useful, and they were even comparable to the skills of red-level soul pearls. Obtaining a red-level pearl is extremely difficult, and the success rate of absorption is only 50%, but Ethan's spirit weapon can produce red pearl-level mutations so easily. Looking up, the guy saw that the branches of the pearl were spreading in different directions. It turns out that each skill can generate even more branches, and he can create an incomparably huge tree of skills. And if it really develops like this, then it is possible that a flash of green light will tear the skies apart in the future. However, Ethan later returned to his world and went to school the next day. Vivian entered the office looking for Ethan there. She needed the green pearl, and she was ready to pay $30,000 for it. However, Ethan was smart enough not to agree to such a deal, and instead of the pearl, he offered the girl to buy fried donuts from him. However, Vivian did not want to give up. She needed this pearl. Tapping his foot on the table, Oliver sat down opposite Ethan, deciding to support the girl, saying that she would need this thing much more than some mediocrity. Oliver was angry. He didn't understand why this upstart suddenly became so arrogant, because he still wouldn't be accepted into Tenshi's palace with his 3 holes on the weapon. But Ethan decided to end this pointless argument and said that there was nothing left to buy because he had already devoured this pearl a long time ago. Vivian turned to leave, advising the guy not to be arrogant and saying that they still had a long way ahead. Meanwhile, the teacher entered the class. She was ready to announce the list of those who were accepted into Tenshi's palace. She began to read out the list, and Oliver was among the lucky ones. But Ethan's name was not mentioned, and Oliver was about to laugh with all his might at his enemy. But then the teacher said that there was a note in the letter for a student with a special pass, and his name was Ethan. The whole class couldn't believe that this was possible, but Oliver was the most annoyed. He couldn't understand how this idiot with 3 holes could get into the palace, and even with a special invitation. However, the teacher quickly besieged him, saying that there was no point in doubting the decision of the Tenshi Palace. Everyone whose names were called had to go home and pack their things, as the spirit master would pick them up in the afternoon. Ethan proudly walked past the desks, collecting surprised and even embittered glances from his classmates. Arriving home, he was about to say goodbye to his sister and say that she could call him at any time when clothes flew into his face. Ethan was surprised that his sister was collecting so many things for him, but the girl told him not to delude himself because these clothes were not for him at all. She happily handed her brother a shiny badge. Only special students have these, which means that she is also going to the palace. Ethan wondered where she got this badge, and Gwen herself understood that it was all because of their parents. They were once members of the Dawn group and sacrificed themselves to save people when they sealed a large ghost. Realizing that Gwen knew much more than he did, Ethan decided to ask her what this whole organization was like. The girl replied that this is a group consisting of the best spiritual masters. Different spirit lords have different areas of skill and areas of development, and usually each of them specializes in a certain aspect. Moreover, when combined, they have an unexpected chemical effect. The Spirit Lord organization is a group of people with diverse talents. Gwen herself positioned herself as a master of ranged combat, and in the future she will develop in this direction. Ethan decided that they should find good teammates, but his sister just grinned, because no team would want to accept someone who only has 3 skill holes. But Ethan understood that his abilities with unlimited potential made him an equal to the whole team. When the time came, all the chosen students arrived at their destination, where the bus was already waiting for them. Gwen stood near the bus stop waiting for her brother, and all the other students looked at her with undisguised admiration. But this did not last long, as Ethan hastened to lower the most admired ones to the ground because his sister was clearly not on their level. Soon everyone loaded their luggage onto the bus and it set off. No one was told how long they would be driving, and it was very boring to just sit in one place. And then a blonde girl sitting behind them poked her head between the seats of Ethan and Gwen. She wanted to meet her future classmates. Ethan immediately liked the girl. He was glad to meet her, Sally. Her parents are members of the Blue Knight group. The guy said that he had heard a lot about them and simply admired her father, but Gwen understood that he just wanted to butter up his new acquaintance. The guys continued to get acquainted and promised to exchange numbers if they were suddenly assigned to different classes. Gwen quickly ended this performance by saying that her brother didn't really know anything about spirit lords. But in the meantime, something strange was happening. The tunnel through which the students were traveling seemed to never end, and the phones lost signal. Ethan went to the driver to find out what was the matter, but he also did not understand anything. He had driven through it many times, but now the tunnel seemed to be endless. Nothing was visible ahead. Other cars were driving in front of the bus, but now they seemed to have disappeared. In the cabin, panic grew among the students. For some reason, the temperature inside became lower and lower. Something was wrong. Ethan asked the driver to stop the car, and the passengers decided to prepare their spiritual weapons, thinking that ghosts were involved. And then the car finally stopped. Gwen took out her weapon, a fan, and asked everyone to be careful. Ethan knew that this was definitely the work of a ghost, and while everyone else on the bus was worried and trying to calm themselves with the thoughts that they, the children of powerful spirit masters, could not possibly have been ambushed, Ethan's shadow became active again. Her next message said that the dark tunnel was full of unknown horrors, and it was at that moment that Ethan decided to leave the car. The guy understood that the shadow decided to let him out for a reason, so he decided to follow her message and go outside, which the other passengers were very unhappy with. What if some evil spirits entered through the open door? Ethan said that he just decided to go to the toilet, but Gwen realized that not everything was so simple and decided to go with her brother. She still didn't understand what was going on, and her brother told her that some paranormal activity must have happened along the way. Apparently, Tenshi's palace was involved in this. Ethan believed that if they really wanted to become spirit lords, then they couldn't just sit and wait to die. They had to explore this mysterious tunnel. It was pitch dark here, so the guys decided to use flashlights, and Ethan dared to assume that someone must be secretly watching them from Tenshi's palace. At that moment, something fell from above directly into his hand. It was paper money. Soon, the entire road was covered with paper coins. The guys on the bus began to panic more and more because Ethan and his sister said that they had gone to the toilet, but the light from their phones was getting further away. As it turned out, Ethan was right, and someone was indeed watching the students. They were two men. They were carefully watching them through a huge monitor. A middle-aged man with scars running across his face was clearly unhappy that the future spirit lords were simply hiding in a car and waiting to be rescued. His friend, a grown man with a bushy mustache, advised him not to be so critical, because these were just children, and then he turned his attention to the guy and girl who were the first to get off the bus. The men realized that these were the children of William No. 2 of the Dawn group. The man with the mustache explained to his partner that his adopted son, Ethan, only had 3 skill holes, but his own daughter, Gwen, had as many as 12. Hearing this, the man with the scars decided to test the teenagers and ordered one white misty ghost to be sent into the tunnel. He wanted to see Gwen in action, and his partner was very surprised at such hasty measures. But the man just waved him goodbye and said that he had everything under control. Meanwhile, the tunnel was getting colder. A moment later, the guys were enveloped in clouds of fog. It thickened and thickened. Ethan realized that this meant that the white misty ghost was nearby, so he stepped forward, leaving his sister behind, because he knew that this creature usually attacked from behind, and this way they would have a better chance of noticing it. He also understood that he could only use the green light flash one time, and then it would be unavailable for a full minute, so he couldn't miss, but he believed that with green-level skills, he could defeat the ghost. Frightening sounds were heard in the distance. They were getting closer, and Ethan knew that it was a ghost. It was getting colder, but the guy had not yet seen the ghost, but when he turned around, he was numb with horror. A terrifying creature towered over his sister. His eyes seemed to be sewn together with threads, and thick smoke billowed from his mouth. The gusts of wind were so strong that they literally grabbed Gwen and carried her straight towards the ghost, and then Ethan realized that his target was the girl. But he was not going to give his sister into the clutches of this monster. In one movement, he jumped up, taking out his dagger on the fly. The guy swung his weapon using his skill, a flash of green light. This technique caused the ghost to howl in pain and evaporate. Soon Gwen was freed from the clutches of the thick fog. She ran up and grabbed her brother. She didn't understand why the fog continued to thicken, but Ethan assured her that the fog ghost would not harm them. Meanwhile, the man with the scars was watching everything through the monitors. He also did not understand where so much smoke was coming from, because one ghost was not capable of this. He understood that the descendants of great people were on the bus, so his safest option was to go and check for himself what happened there. And the white fog continued to thicken around the teenagers, but Ethan assured his sister that he would deal with it and left the girl behind in a safe place. The young man swung his dagger looking for the spirit because the fog expanded his range of perception, and as soon as it touched the creature, it would no longer be able to escape. And when the ghost finally caught up to him, Ethan flew up to him in one movement and hit him with the weapon straight on the back. However, the hits felt like the guy had hit metal. It seemed like the only way to injure this creature in any way was to use the skill. But was it worth his time to wait for it to cool down? Ethan didn't want to wait that long, so another option came to his mind. Hiding in the fog, he attacked the spirit from behind, precisely into the deep wound that the flash of green light left on him. He only needed one successful attack, and he did it, destroying the creature in one motion. He left behind a soul pearl, and although it took Ethan a lot more energy to deal with the white-level ghost, he still killed it himself. He knew that he could use the soul pearl to break through the advanced bursts of green light again, since a minute-long reload was too long for the constantly changing battlefield. Gwen, meanwhile, emerged from the fog and found her brother, glad that he was not hurt, but the calm did not last long. Ethan realized that there was something in the fog, and it seemed quite strong. The same man with scars came out of the fog. He introduced himself as Marcus from Tenshi's palace. Ethan quietly handed the soul pearl into Gwen's hand. Then he smiled as if nothing had happened, and said that his brilliant sister was able to calmly defeat the white misty ghost. Marcus was pleased with this result and told the guys to go back to the bus. Looking after them, he thought that this boy was very lucky to have such a talented sister. After some time, all the students reached the end of the tunnel where Marcus was waiting for them. He was extremely unhappy with the way the students reacted to the supernatural event and stated that people could not trust their lives to such cowards. A short-haired man pretending to be one of the students also shamed them, saying that he was with them on the bus the whole time and saw their reaction. But when Marcus saw Ethan and Gwen, he seemed to blossom, saying that he was very glad that they were so brave, especially Gwen, who at that age was able to destroy a white-level ghost. After that, everyone returned to the bus. Ethan was glad that it was all over, but his sister looked unhappy. She didn't understand why her brother put on all this show and gave her the pearl of his soul, but he only replied that he did it because he loved her. But Gwen was adamant. She held out the pearl and put it back in her brother's hand, because it was unfair to take his merits for yourself. Ethan understood that even if people found out the truth, the most they would do was simply praise him. But for Gwen, such an achievement would benefit the distribution of classes in the palace. But realizing that he would still have the pearl, he squeezed it in his palm, deciding to see what skill it would unlock. As soon as he focused on her, she shone with a bright light in his hands. A moment later, he found himself back in outer space, where he had been before. He realized that the flash of green light had taken a step forward thanks to this pearl. And then Ethan saw that the pearl was again divided into 3 more directions. He couldn't believe it. Could it be branching out into additional skills again? And so it was. The green pearl of the afterlife ghost made it possible to freely control the movement of the green flash, increasing its speed 3-fold. The black water ghost soul pearl added tags to the attack, and the more tags there were, the higher the explosion damage after using the flash. The white pearl of the hanged ghost, on the other hand, made it possible to create 3 cursed flashes. Thus, no matter which way Ethan progressed, the flash of green light could evolve into a skill no less powerful than a red-level soul pearl. However, water ghosts were very rare and only appeared where there were a lot of rivers, and hanged ghosts had a red level and were incredibly difficult to find. But then his sister brought Ethan out of his thoughts. All the other students looked out the windows in fascination because they had already arrived at their destination. This was the city of Skynet, an incredibly beautiful and picturesque place. Soon the students were dropped off and asked to gather in the central square. As it turned out, a branch of the Tenshi Palace was located deep in the mountains. Besides Ethan himself, there were about 500 other people here, many of them members of the elite. Oliver and Vivian were also here. They looked at the guy with dissatisfaction, but this did not last long. Several people came out to the main square. They were teachers. All eyes were directed at Gwen, because she had killed the white, misty ghost before arriving at the palace and was undoubtedly a first-class seedling of this stream. The girl felt awkward from such attention, but her brother hastened to assure her that they just wanted to get to know her better, because she was a specially selected student. He patted his sister on the head, deciding to continue to adhere to the version that it was Gwen who killed the ghost, and promised that next time he would definitely protect her. Meanwhile, Marcus was watching them. and he was very worried that the boy continued to hide behind his sister's skirt, and so he decided that they needed to be assigned to different classes. His partner noticed that the man was not taking his eyes off the girl, and decided to tell him that he also noticed her for his class, to which Marcus immediately attacked him, challenging him to a duel. A woman with short purple hair and a turquoise suit with a low neckline intervened and shamed Marcus. But Marcus was serious. He had his eye on Gwen even before she entered Skynet, to which the woman replied that she had chosen her much earlier than the man. A serious scandal broke out between them, and they even drew their weapons, intending to decide in battle who was right. However, they were stopped by the sound of a cane hitting the ground. It was an old gray-haired man who demanded that these games be stopped. The quarrel immediately stopped. The man and woman were terrified by the very sight of that man. The old man walked up to Gwen and her brother and stared at Ethan. Did he really realize that he was different from ordinary people? The man said that the girl should choose her own path and her future class. A woman with purple hair immediately ran up to Gwen. She introduced herself as Emma, the leader of Class A. She promised to make the girl a legendary spirit mistress of at least level 5. Arthur, the same plump man with a mustache, the head of Class B, came up from behind, noting what excellent noodles Emma was hanging on the girl's ears, and said that if Gwen joined his class, he would give her 3 soul pearls of the green level and also make her an overlord 3 levels. The other teachers also began to take turns running up to the girl, each trying to offer her something more. But Marcus was determined to get Gwen into his class, so he offered her 1 hanged ghost soul pearl if she would join him. Emma and Arthur realized that the man was going crazy because he was ready to give away the pearl, which ranks 7th among the soul pearls of the red level, and for Marcus himself, it was the best opportunity to finally rise above level 3. Ethan knew that this pearl gave the shackle skill. After releasing the spiritual master, a field would be created, and the force of gravity on the enemy inside it would be increased several times. Moreover, the 3rd branch of the green light flash can create a new skill, 3 cursed flashes, but for this it needs the soul pearl of the hanged ghost, and although it was important for Ethan, he could not interfere with his sister's decision. But apparently the sister herself needed advice, because she could not make up her mind, but her brother urgently asked her to decide for herself. Gwen turned to Marcus, asking him to answer one question. She wondered if her brother Ethan would be able to study with her if she joined his class. Marcus clearly didn't like this proposal because the boy had only 3 holes for the skill, and he, on the contrary, wanted to send him to hell. Then Gwen turned to Emma, who was happy to accept her, it seems, under any conditions. Marcus really didn't want to bother with her insignificant brother, but he still agreed. Getting Gwen into his class was the most important thing for him. Ethan and his sister were very happy that everything had turned out so well, but Marcus was very angry. He wanted to do something to give this boy some credit. Soon all the students gathered on the training ground. Their first lesson began. Marcus stood in front of them. He himself had been in the place of these guys before. He remembered how scared he was when he first saw the ghost. He said that if they wanted to become spirit lords, first of all, they must put aside fear, like their classmate Gwen. And as soon as the girl mentioned that her brother helped her defeat the ghost, Marcus got angry again. It was necessary to make Gwen understand that her brother was no match for her. However, he continued the lesson by saying that the power of a spirit lord comes from the soul pearl, and the same skill will have a huge gap in the hands of different masters. And to demonstrate this, he chose an apprentice, Ethan. He asked what skill was revealed to him after absorbing the green pearl, and the guy answered. It was a flash of green light. Marcus also had this skill, and he intended to show this brat the difference between them. He said that it takes at least a minute for a level 1 spirit lord to release the skill, but Marcus himself is at level 3, so it takes him 30 seconds. But Ethan interrupted him, saying that he too only needed 30 seconds. Marcus didn't understand how this was possible, since the boy didn't even have a level, and yet he wasn't going to acknowledge his abilities. Deciding not to demonstrate the difference in skills, the man invited the students to practice in person, and for this they had to split up into pairs. The guys began to practice close combat, since for them it was so far the most effective way to protect themselves. Marcus asked Gwen to demonstrate useful skills to others, and the girl coped with the task perfectly. Everyone looked at her in admiration, both the students and Marcus himself. However, seeing Ethan hanging around his sister again, he decided to pair him with Derek so they could practice what they had just learned. Derek was twice as tall and strong as Ethan, but Marcus explained his choice of opponent by saying that none of the students were immune from real combat, and if they turned out to be weak, they would be unworthy of their place in the palace. But Ethan wasn't scared because he knew what he was capable of, and it wasn't him, Derek, who needed to be scared. Marcus assured that if something happened to the boy, they would be able to patch him up. A shadow message appeared in front of Ethan again. It recommended showing the enemy his true strength, because after absorbing the white misty ghost, the guy gained the ability to spray. The fight began, and Derek immediately flew at his opponent, and if his blow managed to hit the vital organs, then Ethan would lose the ability to move. And then the guy realized that he had no choice but to use spray. In an instant, Ethan found himself behind his opponent and swung his flaming fist in his direction. Targets began to flash before his eyes. The head, the back, the joints. These are all Derek's weak points. Suddenly, Ethan's eyes glowed red. His aura took on the appearance of a terrible monster, and he understood that he must kill him with one blow. Horrifying voices began to play in the young man's head. They said that the desire to kill is in Ethan's blood, and he cannot escape from it. He must kill Derek. Each time the voice became louder, he kept echoing, "Kill, kill, kill." After all, he was born with the desire to kill. But Ethan was not going to give in to the voice. He swung towards the enemy using a twisting fist of wind. The next moment he struck. But the fist barely touched Derek's face, leaving only a small abrasion on it. The shockwave hit the wall of the training hall, leaving a huge smoking dent, and the students crowded around Ethan. No one understood how this guy could do this because he only has 3 skill holes. But Ethan realized that he had just had a real desire to completely destroy his opponent, and he was not at all happy about it. Gwen pulled him out of his thoughts and ran up to her brother to make sure he wasn't hurt. She took his hand and turned to Marcus to appreciate her brother's strength. But the man didn't know what to answer because Ethan only has 3 skill holes. Why is his strength so great? Without waiting for a satisfactory answer, Gwen emphatically said that her brother did not need their approval at all. Turning around, Gwen and Ethan walked away from the site, attracting everyone's surprised glances. One of the students, Valerie, a student of Class E and the owner of 9 skill holes, smelled a familiar smell, and there could be no doubt it was exactly who she was thinking about. When evening came, Ethan and his sister reached the residential complex where the palace students were renting apartments, but there was a problem. There were no more rooms left. The manager of the complex could not offer them anything other than to go to the suburbs and try to look for housing there. At that moment, an unfamiliar dark-haired girl in a white dress approached the guys from behind and said that she could sublet them an apartment at a low price. The girl said that she herself is a student and lives in apartment 1701. She paid for it 3 years in advance, but now she is forced to leave, and the apartment remains empty. The manager glanced unkindly at the teenagers because in apartment 1701, the tenant was constantly changing. Soon, the mysterious girl took the guys to the apartment and opened the doors for them. The room was large and very clean. But Ethan was alarmed by the fact that the furniture was immaculate, as if no one had ever used it. And the guy was about to give up this apartment and find something less suspicious when the girl said that she was ready to give them a 50% discount. Ethan could not refuse such an offer, and nevertheless signed the contract, after which the girl gave them the keys and said that they should not contact her anymore. Having wished the guys a happy stay, she left the apartment. Gwen was alarmed by this behavior, but Ethan, not wanting to worry his sister, hastened to assure her that everything was fine with the house. On that note, Gwen went to bed and advised her brother to go to bed too. However, the guy was not going to sleep, because the reaction of that girl and the atmosphere in the apartment itself seemed strange to him, and he had to find out what was going on here, so he settled down on the sofa to watch this place all night. At first it was quiet, but after some time the guy heard the sounds of dripping water. When he opened his eyes, he could not understand when he had fallen asleep and who covered him with a blanket. The sounds also confused him, because his sister always turned off the water tightly after taking a bath. Peering, Ethan saw a man standing at the other end of the room. He grinned and made strange sounds, and the guy couldn't figure out who it was. Terribly frightened, he began to slowly approach the person, still not understanding who was in front of him. Perhaps it was Gwen. And then the man turned around, his black and red eyes looking straight at Ethan. The creature approached the guy, whispering something under his breath, and then the young man realized that he was dealing with a ghost. Now it's clear why the price of housing was so low. The spirit stated that this was his home, and Ethan was not welcome here but did not come closer to the young man. He must not have been hostile. A shadow swirled under Ethan, and the ghost was clearly afraid of it. When the guy turned on the light, there was no one in front of him. However, the night ended and a new school day began on the Tenshi Palace campus. The first thing Gwen did was tell Ethan that last night a ghost pretended to be her brother and was hanging around her door, and she almost opened it for him. Ethan also told her that he had met a ghost, and then they came to the conclusion that they urgently needed to move out of this apartment. But the guy decided not to rush, because they were told that it was normal to be afraid of ghosts at first, and the spirits themselves did not look so hostile. Suddenly, someone's dark strands fell over the young man's face. Turning around, he saw in front of him a long-haired girl in shorts and a long red coat. It was the same student who smelled Ethan yesterday at the training ground, Valerie. She said that she lives in apartment 1703 and can help get rid of the ghost in their home. Coming closer to the guy, she also added that he could come in just like that if he wanted. However, Gwen hastened to interrupt their sweet conversation, saying that she herself has 12 skill holes, so they don't need outside help. Realizing that she was not particularly welcome here, Valerie turned around and said that in this case, they would have to deal with the ghosts themselves. Just as she was about to leave the office, Marcus walked in. He didn't expect to see Valerie here at all. Seeing that the students were chilling, he hurried to send them out for a run, because future spirit lords should also be well prepared physically. And then Ethan decided to ask, "Is it true that there are no ghosts in Tenshi's palace?" Marcus was a little irritated by this question, since the palace had been passed down from generation to generation for thousands of years, and its protective formation was invulnerable to any evil spirits. But Ethan was also wondering why they had to rent an apartment outside if the palace was so big. Here Marcus could not resist shouting that the protective formation of the palace was created from the primordial souls of 5 primeval ghosts, but immediately realized that he had said too much. But Ethan was very happy to hear something about primordial ghosts and primordial souls. But the teacher abruptly ended the conversation, saying that it would be better for him to concentrate on training and not bother himself with unnecessary things, and then wished him and his sister good luck and left. Left alone, Ethan began to think that Tenshi's palace was really full of secrets, and the further they went, the more interesting they became. He decided to group his thoughts a little on paper, and then his sister came up to him, and then Ethan asked her if she had received the hanged ghost pearl that Marcus promised to give her. Gwen said that when she reaches the first level, she will be given the inheritance of her parents, and when she reaches the second level, she will be given a pearl. In general, Ethan agreed with this state of affairs, but he was still worried that there were many powerful masters in Skynet who would not allow any supernatural phenomena here. And yet no one has resolved the problem with apartment 1701, but Ethan was determined to find out for himself tonight. Meanwhile, the dark-haired ghost girl scribbled on the walls and floor of her room, continuing to repeat one phrase, "Get out of the house." When midnight came, Ethan realized that the time had come. The ghost was here. A pale, dark-haired girl in a white dress moved awkwardly through the house, heading to the guy's room, obviously trying to pretend to be Gwen. She carefully walked to the door and called Ethan. The young man opened the door for her and pretended to believe that this was his real sister. He asked if she wanted to eat, to which the ghostly girl answered in the negative. The spirit was confused. Didn't he understand that she was not his sister? Why wasn't he scared? Suddenly the door opened again and Ethan asked why the girl was still there. He took her hand and led her to the kitchen, still intending to feed her. The ghost didn't understand. She was angry about this situation. Was this guy really playing with her? A black aura swirled around the girl. Her eyes turned red, and she screamed at Ethan to get out of her house. But Ethan just smiled, as if not at all surprised that the girl was not Gwen, and still offered her something to eat. This attitude infuriated the ghost. She didn't know what to say. Suddenly, her essence evaporated and flew away, no longer wanting to take part in this performance. Ethan was surprised. This ghost girl did not attack him. What could have happened to her that she became like this? When morning came, the guy was woken up by Gwen's scream, and he immediately ran to her. But as soon as he opened the door, women's underwear flew at him. Gwen was extremely indignant. How could her brother keep so much women's underwear under the bed? And most importantly, why? The girl left the room, and Ethan saw a whole box of red lingerie. Was it really the tricks of that ghost girl to take revenge on him? But there was something else. At the bottom of the box, Ethan saw a framed photograph of two girls. At the bottom, there were two names. Zoe, obviously she was the ghost, and another, Gloria. There was also a phone number nearby, and Ethan decided that he should call it. The girl with purple hair, the one in the photo, was sitting at her desk in the office when suddenly her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar to her, so she decided not to answer the phone. Then she received a message from Ethan, saying that he had met Zoe and would like to talk about it. Gloria was shocked. She didn't understand what was happening. But the guy explained to her that he had encountered Zoe's ghost in apartment 1701 and would like to find out what happened to her. The woman was horrified. She couldn't believe that Zoe's ghost had really settled in this apartment, and then she decided to call Ethan via video. She said that if he really wasn't joking, he could try to help Zoe find peace, and then later she would give him a red-level soul pearl. And although Ethan wanted to get his hands on this pearl, he still really wanted to solve the situation with Zoe. He needed to know if she was killed and if her death was connected with Tenshi's palace. He showed Gloria a photo of her and Zoe together. Seeing him, the woman could not hold back her tears. She wanted the girl to be free after all these children. She revealed that when Zoe was a student at Tenshi Palace, she was full of hope for the future. But people from all sorts of places come to the palace, and soon she was noticed by several rich students, and one day they abused her. Zoe didn't want to be humiliated, so she exposed them online, and soon everyone knew about the situation. Undoubtedly, the scoundrels were punished, but the most extreme measure in Tenshi's palace was simple expulsion. But Zoe herself did not gain anything from this situation. On the contrary, her offenders had much more power outside the palace. In the end, they killed Zoe, and then she became a wandering ghost, and Tenshi's palace did not comment on this situation. Gloria said that even as the head of the association, she could not help the girl find peace. Therefore, if Ethan really wanted to help her, he had to try very hard and not get into something terrible himself. This ended their conversation, and the shadow again sent a message to Ethan. It said that people are afraid of ghosts, and ghosts know that people are poisonous. The depravity of a person's heart is worse than anyone's, but this had nothing to do with Ethan, because he would choose the easiest way to kill Zoe's ghost and allow her to rest in exchange for the red pearl of the soul. Ethan knew he could easily deal with this spirit. However, he did not understand why everyone believed that death was the only way to put her to rest. Because if he chose this method, then how would he be different from the loser he was in his previous life? He decided that he would use his power and his methods to allow Zoe to find true peace. Sometime later, Ethan went for a night walk through the bus station, and meanwhile, the supernatural phenomena in Skynet City were getting worse every day, and now the Tenshi Palace decided to intervene. In order to uncover supernatural incidents and enhance students' practical experience in fighting ghosts, different tasks were given daily. Finally, Ethan came to the destination of one of them. It was bus 444, and it was haunted. Inside, it was as if people were whispering and ghosts were crying. Everything said that he had come. Ethan understood this too, and at that moment he felt someone approach him from behind. It was a fair-haired young man. He put his shield forward, not understanding what this guy was doing here. Ethan waved his hand in a friendly manner, saying that apparently they both had a mission on bus 444, to which the young man grinned unkindly, probably thinking that this was an ordinary freshman. Ethan said that there is a green-level ghost living here, and if you deal with it, you can get a green pearl. The young man approached him and demanded that he follow his instructions unquestioningly, and Ethan readily agreed. The guy stated that he was a level 2 spirit lord, so he would take care of him if anything happened. In fact, he was thinking that in case of danger, he would simply use the blue-haired boy as cannon fodder. The young man introduced himself as Neil, stating that if Ethan was truly a sophomore, then he should know what the name meant. And Ethan knew exactly what it meant. The guys got on the bus and the young man paid for the fare, saying that he only had a large bill left. The driver replied that he would change money for him and then paper. Otherworldly money fell from the roof. Ethan caught one of them on his finger and thanked the driver. But Neil was shocked by his calmness, because he himself was already ready to summon spiritual weapons. Suddenly, the man heard sounds outside the bus and decided to look out the window. A ghostly woman entered the next bus. The entire transport was literally surrounded by spirits. Neil ran up to Ethan in horror, informing him that there was another bus 444 nearby, and there were just a bunch of ghosts. But the guy didn't understand. Was the older one really seeing double? However, Neil knew that he needed to get off at the next stop and directly destroy the car. Meanwhile, the bus started moving and traveled some distance. Neil told the driver to slow down as he was about to get out. But as soon as the transport stopped, ghosts immediately rushed through the open doors. They blocked Neil's path, whispering something of their own. The spirits surrounded the guy, and he had no way to get off the bus. And meanwhile, the driver had already closed the doors. A moment later, the entire bus was filled with ghosts. They surrounded Neil, who was barely holding back his screams of horror. The young man was angry. He couldn't get out of here. It was becoming more and more dangerous inside, but this blue-haired boy didn't even raise an eyebrow. Meanwhile, a spirit who was constantly itching sat down next to Ethan, and the guy, citing some kind of allergy, asked the otherworldly passenger to sit with his blonde friend. The ghost obediently stood up and headed towards Neil, and he was perplexed. Could this boy really communicate with them? Soon the Nile was surrounded in all directions by a variety of ghosts. Ethan's shadow had a message for him again. It said that his special buddy would get off at the next stop, which meant he had one last chance. Suddenly, the bus ran out of fuel and the driver got out to refuel. Panic began inside the salon. The ghosts screamed and cried, not understanding why they stood still. Neil was on the verge of hysterics. He did not understand how this task could only have a green level because it was definitely red. Ethan also realized that Tenshi Palace had completely underestimated the seriousness of Bus 444, and from the looks of it, the real ghost here was the driver. Neil realized that he had no choice but to use his thick-headed partner to get out of here, so he invited him to kill the ghosts together and go outside. Ethan agreed, grinning slyly at the older man. With one movement, the guy summoned his spiritual weapon and the ghosts immediately rushed towards him. The blonde thought that this boy was definitely very stupid, since he decided to use a weapon while standing in a crowd of spirits and tried to quietly get off the bus himself. However, other ghosts blocked his path. He knew that he needed to immediately release his skill, Blood Rush, which was hiding his energy, and then quickly escape. He only had 10 seconds and he had to get out of here while that dumbass distracted the ghosts. But then suddenly a flash of light flew into his back. Soon Ethan emerged from the fog and Neil was incredibly annoyed. How dare this brat attack him? And then Ethan decided to ask him if he remembered who Zoe was. Neil remembered. This is the girl because of whom he was suspended from Tenshi's palace for 2 years. He realized that the boy had come for revenge, but he was not going to give up so easily. The blonde rushed at the young man, swinging his shield with all his might. But at the moment of impact, Ethan quickly pulled the ghost standing behind him by the collar and shielded himself from the shield. The next moment, the guy pulled out his dagger and was about to hit Neil, but he had a special skill: bronze skin. Ethan realized that with such meager skills, he would never defeat the bronze ghost, and he simply bought this soul pearl. Children of rich people believe that money can buy everything, even human life, and these thoughts made the guy very angry, so he pushed Neil back onto the bus with all his might. The blonde didn't understand why this guy's power was so variable, but Ethan advised him not to waste time on unnecessary thoughts because his skill would soon expire, and it was unknown whether Neil would be able to live until that time. The young man knew that he would have to use the bronze skin to hold off these creatures, but it was unlikely to help him much. Then Neil howled, begging Ethan to help him. He promised him anything in exchange for his salvation. But Zoe also begged him for mercy, didn't she? But Neil didn't care about this girl. He didn't care about her at all. He believed that her death meant nothing, and in response to this, Ethan kicked the bastard away. The ghosts were already 2 steps away from the blonde, and he continued to beg the guy to save him. He said that he would give him any red-level soul pearl. The offer was tempting, so Ethan asked Neil to come closer to him. Hope appeared in the young man's eyes, and he crawled towards his savior, barely escaping from the clutches of the ghosts. However, Ethan, instead of saving the guy, only told him that for any action you have to pay, and this was his payment, and then he closed the doors of the bus. At that moment, the ghosts rushed at Neil, tearing him apart. When it was all over, the only thing Ethan regretted was that he didn't hear the screams of that bastard. At that moment, a spirit approached him from behind. He asked what it was like to kill his own kind. The guy was about to swing his blade to hit the ghost, but it intercepted his hand, and when Ethan turned around, he saw that it was the driver. He was curious because people kill ghosts because they harm them. But why do they kill the same people? To which Ethan replied that he just kills those he doesn't like. The driver found it interesting. He said that he had not experienced such a special feeling for a long time. He turned to the guy, saying that he would like to take him with him on the road, but Ethan did not want to end his life so early. The guy looked at the spirit and realized that this driver was on a completely different level than those white ghosts on the bus. He swung at the spirit, but it easily dodged the blow. The driver realized that there was no way to return the boy back to the ghostly territory, and then asked if he still had the money he gave him. Realizing that they remained, the spirit asked Ethan to keep them, and then disappeared. After a while, Ethan returned to the apartment. Neil was dead. He understood that there were still 6 left. The next day, classes continued, and Marcus announced that the test on bus 444 was now at a red level, and also that 4 ghosts had appeared in the neighboring city and had already killed 7 girls. At that moment, a message came to Ethan's phone. It was Gloria. She had already seen the news about Neil's death and asked what pearl Ethan would like as a reward. She was very straightforward, so the guy also decided not to be modest and asked for 1 bronze-level pearl and 1 hanged ghost pearl. However, Marcus had one more important announcement. It concerned all first-level spirit lords. As it turned out, Tenchi Palace allowed first-year students to choose a white-level soul pearl at will. Ethan walked between the shelves with pearls and chose the one that suited him, and finally found it. It was the pearl of the soul of a black ghost. It gave the black light skill. It increased the lethality of power against ghosts. The shadow informed Ethan that if she absorbed 1 red-level soul pearl, his spiritual weapon would gain a new skill. However, to unlock the 5th skill hole, you needed a fatal level pearl, and the 6th required a catastrophic level, but it was too early to think about that, so Ethan simply inserted a white pearl into his dagger. She was successfully absorbed, and in a moment she expanded 3 more advanced chains. They made it possible to increase the protection and range of the black light, and also made it possible to weaken the enemy. Ethan was pulled out of his thoughts by Gwen, who ran up to him, asking him what pearl he had chosen. The girl secretly told her that Marcus secretly gave her the pearl of the soul of a miasma ghost, whose ability forms the shackle skill. Ethan was seriously surprised because this pearl was of a green level, a level higher than those given to the others. Gwen asked him to keep it a secret and said that Marcus was waiting for her and his brother could keep her company. When they went out into the yard, the man was already there. Valerie was standing behind him, and 2 more guys were standing on his side. He explained that according to Tenchi Palace tradition, after choosing a soul pearl, students must form a team of 5 spirit masters. But Gwen didn't like this idea. She just wanted to be with her brother. Then Valerie intervened in the conversation and suggested that Ethan team up. Gwen didn't like this arrangement either. She grabbed her brother, not wanting to let him go with this girl. They were interrupted by Marcus, who said that although they were free to team up with whoever they wanted, the teacher still hoped that the best students would form one team. He had 2 other people as examples, Henry and Chad. They both had 8 skill holes, their grades were at the highest level, and they were also from wealthy families, so in the future the entire team could acquire red-level pearls. However, Ethan was not happy with this development of events. He took his sister's choice seriously, and these guys themselves looked strange. Leaving Gwen with them would simply be dangerous. Henry and Chad were not at all happy that they were spoken of that way. Out of anger, Chad pulled the string of his bow and released an arrow, engulfed in a blue aura. But Ethan noticed her in time and immediately rushed to Gwen, covering her with himself. He fought off the arrow, flying at them with a dagger. At that moment, Henry appeared behind them. He swung his hammer towards the guy, preparing to strike. However, Ethan was not taken aback. He carefully pushed his sister away from him and kicked the guy's attack, knocking the weapon out of his hands. When the brawl was over, the young man approached his angry fellow students, preparing to take proper revenge on them for such an outburst. But by that time, Marcus had already arrived. He said that fighting in the group was prohibited, to which Ethan offered to arrange a fair competition between him and the guys. They themselves were not against it either. Chad suggested organizing a competition between teams of spirit lords. Ethan was only too happy to face them in a duel, but told them not to blame themselves if they were seriously injured. Soon, all the students participating in the battle were already in the arena, and their classmates came to see who would win. However, there were only 3 people on Ethan's team, himself, Gwen, and Valerie, and this became another reason for ridicule from Henry. But Ethan was sure that he alone would be enough to deal with these 5 scoundrels. However, according to the rules, the team really had to consist of just 5 people. The guy turned around and looked at the girls sitting in the seats behind. It was Sally and Esther, his new acquaintance. In one motion, they descended into the arena, joining the team, and then the competition was officially opened. The girls summoned their spiritual weapons. Sally was going to be the team's medic, and Esther was going to be the scout. But Ethan stopped them, saying that there was no need for this, and he would like to go alone. Such arrogance seriously angered Harry's team, and the guys immediately rushed at him, preparing their weapons. However, Ethan flew through them in one sharp movement, parrying their blows and knocking the weapon out of their hands, and the guys did not even have time to understand what had happened. One of them swung an axe at the young man, but he easily pushed him away with his foot. Genie was next. As soon as he flew up to Ethan with his axe, he hit him in the stomach with his elbow and he fell. The next moment, the guy summoned his dagger and released green energy directly at the enemy, forcing him to crawl away from the battle. They had to do something, otherwise they would lose, and then Chad came into the game. He pulled 4 arrows at once, preparing to block the opponent's actions. At this time, Ethan was fighting with the rest of the guys, and only a moment before the arrows hit him, he noticed them. But the guy was not taken aback. He deftly jumped to the side, exposing his opponents to attack. Thus, it turned out that the boys beat themselves. But Henry didn't want to give up either. He ordered his guys to squeeze Ethan from all sides, so that he had nowhere to hide. Gwen watched in horror as her brother fought against 5 people at once, and was ready to intervene in the fight. However, Valerie stopped her, because Ethan said that he could handle it himself, and the girls could only trust him. When the young man hesitated for a second, Henry immediately flew towards him with an axe, using a green-level skill. Ethan also used his skill in response, and the guys, turning into 2 energy balls, collided with each other. A moment later, a powerful explosion occurred in the arena. Because of the smoke, it was unclear who ultimately won. But as soon as it dissipated, everyone saw that Ethan was standing without a single scratch, proudly towering over the defeated Henry. However, as it turned out, the battle was not over yet, and Chad rushed to the guy, telling him not to forget about him. A moment later, the arena was enveloped in a huge, foggy dome, Ethan's very skill. Chad stood surrounded by impenetrable clouds. He egged the guy on to finally become a man and fight a fair fight. But before he could finish speaking, Ethan was behind him, holding a dagger to his throat. When the smoke cleared, all 5 of Henry's team were defeated. However, Ethan found this fight quite boring. Marcus couldn't believe his eyes. Could it be that the same guy he thought was insignificant actually defeated 5 strong students single-handedly? At that moment, a man with long dark hair and gray clothes approached him and asked in whose class this boy was studying. Marcus hurried to greet the man. It was none other than Master Isaac, the chief spiritual master of the Tenshi Palace, and he had a 3-star mark on his clothes, meaning that he had defeated 3 ancient-level ghosts. Isaac said that recently a ghost appeared on Skynet and he returned to deal with it, and then he pointed at the blue-haired youth, asking who he was. Marcus explained that this is William's adopted son. He entered school this year. The master couldn't believe it was Ethan. He had grown up so quickly. Soon the young man himself drew attention to the man standing next to his teacher. Literally a moment later, Isaac was right in front of Ethan, causing him to stagger in surprise. He introduced himself by name, saying that he was an old friend of his father. He also stated that William knew the secret of the guy's life, and Ethan was taken aback by such words. He did not understand what secret they were talking about. Isaac invited the boy to have a duel in which all he had to do was touch the master's clothes, and then he would tell him about this secret, and Ethan had no choice but to agree, because he knew too little about the owner of the body, and this information would be extremely useful to him. Ethan knew that the man was very strong, and even if he used one hand, he might not be able to defeat him. But the task was very easy. Just touch the clothes, and then the guy rushed forward, extending his hand to the man's clothes. However, his finger seemed to stop a millimeter from the fabric. A moment later, the man waved his hand, and Ethan was immediately thrown back to the floor. He felt what a powerful spiritual power Isaac had, and realized that a blow to the forehead would not work here. He had to find another way. Then the guy again summoned clouds of fog as he had done before, and decided to attack the master from behind. But Isaac foresaw this too, and with one light blow of his hand, he repelled the young man's attack. Having managed to land on his feet, Ethan found himself right behind the man's back, and realized that now was his chance to win, and immediately reached out with his fingers to the master's clothes. But before he could touch her, Isaac grabbed his hand, saying that he was disappointed with such meager skills of his son William. Ethan didn't understand why this man was so strong. He couldn't free himself from his grip. The next moment, the master threw the guy with force, forcing him to fall to the floor with a roar. Gwen was terrified. She was afraid that something had happened to her brother. She instantly ran up to him, trying to bring him to consciousness, but the young man did not react at all. Master Isaac approached them. He wanted to examine Ethan, and although the girl was terrified by this man, she allowed him to check his brother. The man touched his pulse with his fingers. And then he realized the guy was conscious. The next moment, Ethan jumped up and reached out his hand to Isaac's face. He wanted to see his true face under the mask. However, before he even had time to touch the man, there was no trace of him. He was nowhere to be found. He seemed to have vanished. Could he really be able to teleport? Meanwhile, the master was already standing on the roof of the arena, watching Ethan from above. This was the first time someone forced him to use abilities in this way, because this guy's thoughts were difficult to predict. Marcus arrived in time to the guys. He told Ethan not to dare to do such tricks with Isaac again, but the master had a good heart, so this time he would get away with it. And yet initially everyone gathered here for the sake of the duel, which was already over, and Ethan's team of spirit lords won it. Marcus advised the guys to train more, and the guy hastened to assure him that before going to the ghostly city of San, they would hone their teamwork to perfection. In the evening, lying in his bed, Ethan thought about how strong Tenchi was in the eyes of the palace, and that in the future he could be faced with the same hopeless situation as today. He understood that if he wanted to avenge Zoe, he needed to become stronger. Suddenly, a bracelet appeared on his fingers out of nowhere. Looking around, the guy saw Isaac standing at his window and he was taken aback. How could he get in here and why was he giving him this bracelet? The man replied that in that test, people usually thought about how to touch his clothes, but Ethan wanted to knock off the mask. His thinking was different from other people, and the man admitted that he had high hopes for him. He said that his father, William, was a hero. Once he read his diary, he sacrificed his life to seal the ghost of Fang Men and save the entire city from destruction. His dying wish was to return home at least for a moment, so Isaac hoped that by visiting that ghost town of Fang Men, Ethan could fulfill his father's wish. Ethan immediately realized that he would go to the city at any cost, and then the master asked him to put on the bracelet that he gave him, and the guy thought that although he did not know everything, he could use this chance to get into the depths of a ghost town. When Ethan put on the bracelet, he asked what it was for, but the master replied that he did not need to know some things, and also added that he would remain in Skynet for 3 weeks, but the guy had to pack his things so that tomorrow he would to go to the ghostly city of Sang. Ethan immediately rushed to his bag, because in the city of San it would be much easier for him to obtain the desired pearls of the soul, and then it would be much easier for him to avenge Zoe when the time came. But Isaac stopped him, saying that before that they needed to go somewhere else, since the palace had instructed him to deal with one local ghost. The password for this spirit was Phantom Driver. Meanwhile, ghosts were already gathering near that same bus number 444. The driver beckoned them to quickly take their seats. But as soon as he looked out the window a couple of moments later, he saw that the spirits had been torn apart by something, and he realized that the Tenshi Palace had sent after him the head of the Middle Palace, the lord of the spirits of the 8th level, who has only 3 holes for skills, and yet he was able to suppress 3 ghosts. Isaac didn't expect the driver to end up in Skynet like this. Apparently Tenshi's palace is really underestimated. Meanwhile, Ethan was watching from the bushes. Before coming here, the master mentioned 7 levels of ghosts: white, green, red, evil, disaster, catastrophe, and ancient. And without a doubt, this driver's aura revealed that he was an ancient-level ghost. The ghost was already starting to lose patience. His eyes glowed green, and black marks appeared on his body. He shouted that there was no person in the world who could stop him. He taunted Isaac, declaring that in the future this world would be ruled by spirits, and drove his bus at full speed straight towards the man. However, the master jumped straight onto the roof of the bus in one easy movement. He intended to correct the absurd thinking of this spirit. The next moment, the entire space under Isaac's feet turned into a pile of stone debris, but the bus was no longer there. Ethan decided to retreat a little so as not to be hit by the shock wave, and at this time he tried to understand what ability the ghost driver was using. The task of dealing with this ghost was a little troublesome for Isaac. He raised his hand up and summoned a large bell. The instrument appeared above the man's head. It was surrounded by small portals from which sound waves were heard. The master could hear even the slightest rustle of grass. He concentrated. A moment later, the driver appeared above him. His body seemed to be torn into pieces. And then Isaac realized that although the spirit could travel through time, if space was frozen, then it would be forcibly forced out of it. As soon as the ghost was on the ground, the master extended his hand charged with aura towards him, forcing him to stop. But the driver became even more furious. His clothes began to come apart at the seams, and Isaac was thrown back by the shock wave. The spirit reached the peak of the ancient and got rid of its shackles. A moment later, a bus appeared as if out of nowhere, rushing straight towards the man. However, the master stopped the car with one movement of his hand, tearing it in half. And the spirit, meanwhile, disappeared. Did he really want to escape to Skynet again? Isaac rushed after him, leaving the ghosts of the bus on Ethan. And the guy himself still didn't understand what had happened. How could the bus end up in such a state in the blink of an eye? In fact, due to the time-stop skill, Ethan's perception stopped even before the master used his ability. Suddenly, an illusion appeared before Isaac again, and he had to draw a rune to dispel it. But it was too late. The ghost driver's accomplice had already helped him escape. Ethan was shocked because this was a real battle at the ancient level, and if not for the master, the boy would have been dead long ago. Meanwhile, Isaac left, saying that Ethan could also go home once he dealt with the ghosts, and tomorrow evening they would go to Sang City. But the guy was annoyed. He realized that he was still too weak. Before going to the ghost town, he had to become stronger. And time passed, and the next day Ethan saw a small box with red pearls on his table. Gloria was truly amazing. She was able to get as many as 2 red-level pearls so quickly, so now Ethan could improve his skills and safely go to the ghost town. At that moment, a message appeared in front of him again. The shadow asked him to feed her the pearl of the hanged ghost, and then the guy would have another hole for the skill, as well as the shackle skill, and Ethan decided that this would be the best solution. The shadow swallowed the pearl, and the young man's body seemed to be pierced with a powerful charge of power, so this was the feeling of the red-level pearl. From the influx of power, all the glass surfaces in the room cracked, and the guy received the ability, shackles. He felt that his strength had increased significantly. Taking the dagger in his hands, Ethan saw that a new hole had appeared on it. It turns out that it was time to move on to the branch. Once in the mysterious space, the young man saw branches emanating from the pearl and realized that he should further improve the branch of the demon ghost soul pearl. Thus, the power of the black pearl increased, and new branch skills were revealed to Ethan. These were Iron Armor, Hellfire, and Gemini, which were quite good abilities. Now even a second-level Spirit Master was no match for Ethan. Coming out of the astral state, the guy approached the mirror in which Zoya's ghost was reflected. He said that her offenders would go to the city of Tsang for testing, and when the time came, he would make them pay. Meanwhile, Ethan and Isaac arrived in a ghost town. It was originally an ancient tomb built hundreds of years ago, and the master also noted that he could only stay with the young man for 2 weeks, and how much he could grow would depend on his own effort. Soon the young people came to the cave. There were a number of people around it. Many of them recognized the master. One large man approached Ethan, offering to take him to the ghost town. The guy wondered how far they could take him, because he needed to meet a ghost of an evil level. The man only grinned at the young man's arrogance. He would most likely run away in fear only when he saw a spirit of this level. Their conversation was interrupted by Isaac, who said that he had not met a ghost of such a weak level as evil for a long time. An adult man came up behind him. It was Wilson, the 5th-rank ghost lord and the head of the ghost town. He was glad to greet his head. Soon everyone else joined in, bowing to the master and greeting him, to which Isaac himself said that he was here on personal business. Moving away from the crowd, the man and Ethan went down below. The master explained that there are 10 tombs in total in the city. The first ones are inhabited by ghosts of the white, green, and red levels, but further on there are more serious spirits. He explained that Ethan would now have to rely on his own strength to survive in the first 3 tombs for 2 weeks. In other words, in order to survive, the guy needed such strength that would allow him to defeat red-level ghosts with his own hands. When the men entered the tomb, it was overflowing with luminous souls. Isaac handed the guy a spirit curse pass. It was imbued with incredible resentment and would help partially hide his scent from strangers. He said that grave and iron ghosts live here, and within 3 days Ethan will need to kill 30 and 10 of each type, respectively. The guy remembered that in order to transform the black light skill into black armor, the pearl of the soul of the iron ghost was needed. Meanwhile, the spirits began to slowly creep towards the guy, and although they were of the white level, if they gathered together, they became dangerous, and Isaac wanted the young man to cope without his help. But before Ethan had time to answer, a ghostly hand suddenly came out of the ground and grabbed his leg. Following her, several more ghosts came out and immediately rushed at the guy, but he understood that this clearly would not be enough to defeat him. With one easy movement, he cut the spirits with his daggers without receiving a scratch, because after absorbing the pearl of the soul of the hanged ghost, his physical abilities became much stronger. But before he had time to come to his senses, another spirit appeared behind him, much larger than the previous ones. It was him, the Iron Ghost. Ethan quickly reacted, attacking the spirit from above. He needed his soul pearl. When he struck, he felt how tough the creature's skin was. To his side, the guy heard strange sounds. Turning around, he saw 2 more iron ghosts. They were rushing straight at him. If things continued like this, it would attract even more ghosts, so Ethan needed to deal with them quickly. As it turned out, only his strongest attack was effective against such armored creatures. However, the ghosts continued to advance, and it was not so easy to deal with a whole crowd of green-level spirits at once. Fortunately, the guy's strength has increased significantly recently. Otherwise, he would have had a hard time, and nevertheless, he had to try to deal with the ghosts one by one. Ethan used a fog curtain, and it disoriented the creatures a little. And at the moment when one of them revealed his weak points, the guy dealt a critical blow to him. A soul pearl flew out of the spirit. Ethan picked it up and also noted that if you rely on physical strength, you can save a lot of spiritual energy. He decided not to use the shackles for now. Even if it was a protracted battle, he could handle it himself. In the meantime, he decided to upgrade black light with a pearl. The skill was upgraded to black armor. His blade exuded a black aura. Ethan had unlocked 2 new skills, phantom armor and spiritual armor. They looked amazing, but the guy was afraid that if he continued to improve, he would end up becoming a monster. Meanwhile, an aura enveloped his body, creating an incredibly strong armor that fit perfectly on Ethan, and he was about to test her defenses. The remaining 2 ghosts approached the guy and raised their hands to strike. However, to Ethan's armor, they were no stronger than a mosquito bite. The guy grinned through his mask. Had the ghost really become so weak compared to him? Then he grabbed both spirits, threw them in front of him, and in a moment flew through them, cutting them in half. After receiving 2 more soul pearls, he decided that that was enough fighting for today. After a while, when Isaac and Ethan were sitting by the fire, the boy kept counting the pearls that he had collected. There were 26 of them. But the guy couldn't stop. He was very happy with his results. He decided to ask the master what level the Fenman ghost was, and he answered that it was black, and explained that when ghosts reach the ancient level, their intelligence can be the same as ordinary people. They can also create ghosts, and the ghost is black level, more dangerous than the most ancient. Ethan was surprised because he thought that there were only 7 levels, and by this logic it turns out that there are ghosts more dangerous than the black level. Isaac replied that there were only 3 of them, but everything connected with them was strictly prohibited, even their names and their very essence. After all, the world was far from being as calm as Ethan saw it, so the master advised him to try to go to high school as soon as possible, and there Isaac would be able to tell him much more. Now it was time for the man to go, but he promised to send Ethan to the next tomb tomorrow. Meanwhile, 2 weeks passed. The guy continued to train hard. After breaking through to Spirit Master Level 2, his spiritual power was enough to maintain the shackles for 15 seconds, but with his current strength, he could hardly kill a hanged ghost, his maximum being an almost red-level ghost. Isaac told him that he could already survive the 3rd tomb alone, but there was one more thing he needed to deal with before he left. Ethan immediately cheered up, thinking that they would take on a big deal, but the master only led the guy along. He was going to show him the deepest part of the ghost town. Soon they came to the 7th tomb. The ghost of Tsang was here, right outside the door. Isaac asked the guy to be extremely careful because this place was very dangerous. And Ethan felt how strong and gloomy the atmosphere here was. It would definitely affect his mind if he let it go, because here was a ghost much more powerful than that driver. Suddenly, the guy seemed to be pierced by strings of an ominous aura. Voices in his head kept telling him, "Kill him, kill him." When he could no longer resist the force conquering his will, he grabbed a dagger and rushed at Isaac. But the master stopped Ethan with one deft movement, surprised at how easily the ghost of love subdued his mind, and realized that the guy needed to train harder. When the young man was already lying on the ground, the man called the bell. It beat over Ethan's head in a certain rhythm. When the guy opened his eyes, he was already in some unknown place. It resembled Tenshi's palace. An unknown man stood in front of him, but he seemed not to notice the young man at all, and he could not understand what the hell was happening. And then a large adult man burst into the room. He shouted at the stranger, saying that he was the best student of the palace, and now he was researching ghosts. He was very angry. What was this guy thinking? But the stranger replied that after the death of his second mentor, he realized that human life has limitations, but he wanted to defeat death and become like a ghost, immortal. The man rushed at him, scattering all the stranger's things, shouting that the ghosts were already dead, and then ordered all his things to be confiscated. The next memory that Ethan saw was how the stranger prayed in front of the portrait of the deceased. That very large man, he swore that he, Tsang, would never repeat the same mistake again. He wants to break through the boundaries of life and death and become an eternal being. He exclaimed that this was his path. Literally a moment later, the man turned around and seeing Ethan rushed at him, shouting that no one dared to stop him. At that moment, the guy woke up. The bell was still circling above him, but he did not understand what kind of dream it was. Isaac was waiting for him to awaken. He said that the guy was influenced by the aura of a love ghost, and he suddenly lost his mind, but the man had already beheaded the spirit. He gave the young man his pearl of the soul and said that it was time for them to move on. Soon they came to a large temple. The doors opened in front of them, allowing the men passage to the tomb. In this coffin was the ghost of Tsang, the same one that Ethan saw all over Tenshi's courtyard. Suddenly a ghostly snake rushed out of the tomb towards Isaac. But the man immediately stopped her, sealing her back. He said sternly that as long as Tenshi Palace existed, Ghost Kang would not be able to come out of this coffin. He put a seal on it. It was supposed to last for another 3 years, but Ethan wondered why not just kill this ghost, because this way he would definitely not harm anyone. But Isaac said that Ghost Tsang is special, and the guy will know more about it as soon as he enters the central branch. In total, there were 4 branches in the Tenshi Palace: Southern, Eastern, Western, and Northern. Every year, the palace holds a competition between the 4 branches, and only the students who win the competition are eligible to enter the central branch, and if Ethan can do it, then he will find out everything. At this point, the men were forced to say goodbye. Ethan said that he would stay here and wait for his sister and the others. Finally, the master recommended that he train even more in order to become a level 3 spirit lord as soon as possible and get to the central branch ahead of schedule. As soon as Isaac left, the guy realized that all the other students would be here, and he needed to prepare for revenge. He took out photographs of men from his pocket. These were Zoya's killers, who still had not answered for their actions. Meanwhile, the students, under the leadership of Marcus, were setting up tents in the middle of a forest clearing. 4 girls, Gwen, Sally, Valerie, and Esther, were approaching the camp. Ethan's sister reassured Sally, saying that there would be nothing scary in the first tomb, only iron ghosts. But the girl herself understood that she knew about him only thanks to her brother. The teachers had not said a word about these ghosts earlier, and if now they wanted to ask them about what awaited them next, they would not be able to answer, because the students were in real wilderness. Esther said that she did not detect any negative energy nearby, so there are definitely no ghosts within a radius of 10 meters. The girls were about to set up their tents here when they realized that Valerie had disappeared. At that moment, a young man approached them. It was Carl, a second-year student, a second-level spirit lord, one of Zoya's offenders. He was surprised to see several girls in such a place at once and offered them help. Sally was about to agree, but Gwen pulled her back, telling Carl that they could handle it themselves. And Carl, meanwhile, was thinking he asked his friend to conduct an investigation, and it turned out that there were as many as 4 girls in this team, each of whom was beautiful, so the upcoming test promised to be very fun. The man did not give up, arguing that elders should help the younger ones. At that moment, Ethan approached him. Having suddenly appeared here, he chuckled at such a zealous desire to help the girls, but still gave Carl the go-ahead to help set up the tents. Gwen was at a loss why her brother took so long to respond to her messages, to which Ethan suggested that they move away. He wanted to say something to the girls. The guy looked back at Carl in disbelief, because he had just posted the news on the school forum and didn't expect him to get hooked so soon. Having moved a sufficient distance, Ethan said that tomorrow they should go to the 3rd tomb, because the quality of the pearls there is much better, and this will be an excellent chance to strengthen the entire team. He assured the girls that he had already studied the ghosts in advance and did not find any danger there, and moreover, they had a high school assistant. Meanwhile, Valerie reached one of the tombs. A seal was placed on it, and she understood that she had to release the spirit. The creature pulled its hand out of the coffin, tearing the seal off it. A moment later, the tomb flashed with a green aura. The creature was free. It was the ghost of Sang. He insisted that meanness is truly above all things, that this is his path. He looked at the girl. He was wondering what dynasty was now and why she freed him, to which Valerie replied that it was 2020, and she herself was looking for someone like herself. The ghost realized that 500 years had already passed. He had long cast aside his human shell. He was sure that he was exactly the one the girl was looking for. But Valerie needed confirmation. She wanted the ghost to prove that he really could do whatever he wanted. And the spirit was ready to do this. He was going to personally get acquainted with the current Tenshi Palace and prove by killing the girl what she wanted to see. Meanwhile, Ethan's team and Carl went to explore the 3rd tomb, and the 2nd year warned them that the ghosts here were stronger than the ones they had already encountered, so they needed to be careful. At that same moment, as if out of nowhere, a ghost jumped out at Gwen. Ethan immediately rushed to her aid, pushing the spirit away, and his sister grabbed his hand, asking him not to go far from her anymore. Sally and Esther hugged Ethan from other sides. They also wanted the guy to protect them. But Carl was not delighted because his plan had not even begun yet, and the boy was already the center of female attention. Then he smiled tightly and asked Ethan to help him collect the pearls of the soul and let the girls stay here, and the young man agreed. After some time, they moved a decent distance away from the girls. Ethan said that here he met an iron ghost and invited the eldest to split up. But Carl had other plans. He needed to finish off this upstart, and then all the girls would be his. He grabbed the knife and jumped at Ethan from behind, intending to plunge the blade into his throat. However, the guy immediately turned around, intercepting the knife, and Carl couldn't believe his eyes. What happened to his hand? But everyone had their secrets, and Ethan wanted to hear Carl's secret about Zoe. The guy didn't understand because Zoe had been dead for a long time, but Ethan wanted to hear him confess his guilt. Carl didn't like this turn of events. He took out his spiritual weapon. How dare this brat threaten him? He stated that Zoe was too disobedient and died because of it, and now he intended to show this puny first-level spirit lord the difference in their strength. At that moment, Ethan was overcome by a dark aura, and he put on the black armor again. While Carl was staring at him, not believing his eyes, the young man ran up close to him. The next moment, he slammed the scoundrel's head into the ground. Soon the armor fell off, and he continued to beat the killer with his fists. When Carl couldn't even stand on his feet anymore, he begged Ethan to spare him. He even promised to leave those girls from his team at his disposal for a while. For such an incredibly generous offer, he received another blow with his fist. Ethan was sure that such a non-entity like him did not deserve to live in this world. Then Carl began to beg the guy for help. He begged him not to kill him. But Ethan was not going to get his hands dirty on him, because he had already found a suitable executioner for the guy. A moment later, the ghost jumped out of the ground and instantly rushed at Carl. It was a hanged ghost. He squeezed the guy's throat with his long tongue, not allowing him to breathe. After a couple of moments, the creature swallowed Carl completely, smacking contentedly. But the creature did not have to rejoice for long, because immediately after Zoe's offender was killed, Ethan pierced the ghost with his dagger. The second goal of his revenge was eliminated. Soon the girls from his team ran out to him. They were excited to hear a cry for help. Gwen looked behind Ethan and saw the corpse of a hanged ghost. The girl was in shock. Had her brother really become so strong in these couple of weeks that he could easily kill even red-level ghosts? But Ethan didn't show it, instead asking how the rest of the second years Carl's comrades were doing, to which the sister replied that they had tied them up and given them to a herd of grave ghosts. Taking the bag of pearls, the guy realized that it was time to return, and this supply should be enough for some time. Suddenly, the shadow again conveyed a message to Ethan. It said that the boy now does not even suspect the upcoming horror. What could this mean?